So it's too early to give you any more details other than to say one of these individuals was known to us, but not in an immediate threat perspective.
Okay, that's nice to know now. But who else knew that then? Who else knew? The alarm should have gone off. These two alleged perpetrators, that the information was there. I've got a lot of questions about who else knew.
John Powers, thank you for chatting with the issue again. What went through your mind as you watched the events of Bondi unfold?
Oh, jeez. Obviously, sadness. It's a tragedy. You know, I'm a faith-based person, so I can fully appreciate, you know, the celebration of Hanukkah and what the men and the women they were celebrating and the significance of it, yeah, and how, you know, how something like this, and of all places, Australia, I guess. I think, you know, it's. I think throughout the world, Australia's always been seen as that safe place. You know, we're so far away from everything. So, but yeah, I've seen so much death and destruction in war zones that to hear that kind of fire, to see that kind of intensity, and particularly with the alleged shooters.
Tell us then, what else ran through your mind in terms of what issues were at play in letting Bondi happen?
Well, I guess one of the things that struck me with all the media events that happened after it occurred was when the Prime Minister addressed the nation, and he indicated that the alleged shooter or shooters was known to ASIO. The question I had, and it's a question that we in the intelligence community in particular, and in the military, the special operations field is that the question I had when he said that was, okay, that's nice to know now, but who else knew that then? Who else knew? And because there's, you know, Director General Burgess wasn't there to ask the question, but that would be the question I'd ask Director Burgess. Now, it's come out since then that since 2019, they've known about the alleged shooters since 2019. So that was obviously before Mr. Albanese became the Prime Minister. I'm not certain when Mr. Burgess became the Director General. And I'm not trying to put blame on either one of them, but, you know, who else knew that? Because if you sort of walk yourself through things that have happened, like I would do, is that one of the things I was taught this very early on in my career as an Army officer in the special operations community, but it's something that trended throughout my entire career, both as a leader and as a briefer, is that there's kind of three things that we always asked ourselves. First, what do you know and how do you know it? Second is, what don't you know and who you're asking the questions to? But the most important thing was, who else needs to know what I know and you know? And I think that's the question I have as an Australian citizen that I would like to have answered. Who else knew about these alleged shooters, their background? If it came up on ASIO's radar that there's something about this individual that needed to be watched, who else did ASIO inform? It's okay that they informed the Prime Minister, but who else did ASIO at that time also inform? Did they inform, for example, DFAT, so that maybe, you know, if he did travel to the Philippines, as is alleged, that they would have been tracking when he went, because one of them was at least an Australian citizen because he was born here. The other one was here on a permanent residence visa. But those things would have been raised, and it's just, I've got a lot of questions about who else knew, because if you go back and you look at, you know, at what happened in the United States before our 911, there is a lot of information out there about the terrorists that flew those airplanes that wasn't shared throughout the intelligence community or the police community or anything else. So it goes back to who else knew, who else needed to know.
The clues were there before September 11.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I think with the investigations we had in the U.S. after 911, that became very, very clear. I mean, you look at the, you know, people talk a lot, two particular items. They talk about the Phoenix memo, which came out of Phoenix, Arizona, from a field office there in, I believe it was July of 2001. Talked about individuals that were going through training to fly airplanes and things like that. And then there was another that came out of Minnesota in August of 2002. A guy, I'd probably bugger up his last name, but Moussaoui was the individual's name. And again, came in from the field office, and it was based on a tip that the individual who was training this Moussaoui how to fly airplanes was that he was very interested in how to take off, how to fly the airplane, but he couldn't care less about landing it, which was an indicator to this to the instructor. And again, this went back to FBI headquarters, but it never left FBI headquarters.
That was August 2001.
Right, and the Phoenix memo was July 2001, and subsequently Moussaoui actually got picked up for, I believe, violation of immigration 3 weeks before. He did not participate in the actual 911 assaults on the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and then the aircraft that got ditched in Pennsylvania because he had been picked up. Now, whether or not he was being groomed for another kind of operations, I don't know. I can't recall. But yeah, that was, you know, at least 3 months ahead of time, and the information went back, but it was never shared.
Some years later, you went to Australia and were America's most important intelligence officer in Australia at the time. Do you remember your reflections on our intelligence services back then?
Yeah, excuse me. I do, and in particular, I'll just, you know, first of all, the intelligence services that Australia has are just top notch. When I was here, I would say our closest intelligence partner were the Australians. Now, I retired in 2017, so that's 8 years long, but I don't think they've denigrated that much. The relationship was just top notch between the embassy and the intelligence community here and the individual agencies that were liaisoned up with other agencies here in Australia. Full bore, absolutely great. The issue with the intelligence community here in Australia, though, was as good as they were, as I used to like to call them, they were silos of excellence. There was little to no sharing going on. In fact, I would suggest to you there was less sharing going on in the Australian intelligence community than there was in the U.S. intelligence community before 911, and that was pretty bloody bad.
It was worse than the US pre-2001.
I believe so, yeah, I do. And in fact, when I left the U.S. Embassy to go back to retire, they had a gathering for me, and there were many Australian men and women from the intelligence community that were there. They gave me a nice send-off. But my last words to them were, you got to break these stovepipes. You got to learn how to share better. So you're gonna, you know, it's fortunate that Australia has not, at that point in time, had a 911 type of incident. I would suggest to you what happened at Bondi last week is our 911 incident. And as a result of that, there's going to be all kinds of commissions and royal commissions and investigations into it. But I would suggest to you that information sharing, intelligence sharing, whatever you want to call it. I like to call it information sharing because once you get in the intelligence sort of realm of things, it takes on these caveats of is it secret, is it top secret, is it confidential, can it be released? Information is information, and one of the things that came out of the post-mortem of the 911 thing when we created finally in 2004, 3 years after the fact, the Intelligence and Terrorism Prevention Act created our Office of National Intelligence, Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and the position of the Director of National Intelligence. And one of the mandates that the Director of National Intelligence had in the U.S. was to formulate a way into better sharing of information between the national intelligence agencies and law enforcement. Because law enforcement is a critical piece of this whole equation, whether it be in the United States, the UK, or Australia. Because it's the men and women that are on the beat, the New South Wales policemen, the ACT policemen, you pick a police force. They're the ones that are on point for the rest of us. The border force men and women, when we come in. The ASIO or the ACES agent, those are the men and women that are out there that are the first line of defense for us. But the police force in particular is absolutely critical. And it happened in the U.S. and I saw it here in Australia. Is that there's not a lot of push down. One of the things we're taught in the military, and I thought folks like Duncan Lewis, who was at ASIO when I was here, Paul Simon, who was at DIO, then he went over to ACES, John McGarity, they were all military fellas that were running intelligence organizations here in Australia. But one of the things you're taught as a military person, and I thought they were very good at, was we're taught that information goes left and right and down, left and right and down. So you're always pushing that. And their organizations for the most part, until you got to one of these roadblocks, also known as a bureaucrat, because power is knowledge. But the fact that they were pushing the information, trying to push the information down and get it out, is critically important. And I think that's why I think it was in 2017 when we here in Australia finally created the Director General of the Office of National Intelligence here. But I still don't think it's functioning the way that it was intended. And that's not it takes time. I mean, we created the one in the United States in 2004. And the first couple of iterations, it wasn't really until Jim Clapper that we put in the legislation that allowed him to do his job better. In fact, we had one Director of National Intelligence that a lot of people don't remember was a guy by the name of Dennis Blair. He was in between Mike O'Connell and Jim Clapper, and he left the job because he was an admiral. He wasn't an intel guy. He was an operator. And he left because he couldn't get some of the intelligence agencies to share the information.
So the ONI here, our Office of National Intelligence, has not broken down those stovepipes yet.
I don't think so, from my belief. In fact, as you well know, I'm a member of the RSL's Defense and National Security Committee. For this last Intel review that folks want to comment on, that was part of the submission. We had 3 or 4. But one of the submissions that we put in was that there needed to be, the Director General of National Intelligence need to be empowered with more authorities so that he or she could have a better job of coordinating across the intelligence community and making sure that there was equitable information sharing, as I said, not only between the intelligence agencies, but down to state and local police agencies.
So when you left the embassy, the US embassy here in Canberra, and you
Right.
gave that farewell speech and that warning,
Right.
that was your keynote, the sharing of information.
Absolutely. Yeah. That was what I think. That, to me, as an outsider looking in, yes. And I base that on several things. Is that at the U.S. Embassy every Wednesday we would have our country team meeting. It was when the ambassador sat down with everybody, the economic advisor, the political advisor, HR, and all the intel heads that were in the embassy were there. And after that meeting, we would have an intelligence only meeting. All the intelligence heads would meet. And for example, the way, as I mentioned before, let's say, for example, each intelligence agency that was represented in the United States had a counterpart that we worked with here. For example, the Defense Intelligence Agency worked very closely with DIO. The Geospatial Intelligence Agency in the United States worked with our Geo mob here. ASD with NSA. So across the board, that's the way it worked. So you would have sort of someone that you were directly responsible for. Well, I will tell you, I believe, because we'd sit down and talk about everything that was going on in our agencies, we had a better appreciation of what were the gaps and the requirements within the Australian intelligence community than the Australian intelligence community did.
The US knew Australia's problems better than Australia.
I would be willing to bet a month's pay that we did. Now this was before.
Because the US had better sharing of information.
We shared with the information that we had with each other, which we were getting from the Australians.
But the Australians weren't sharing.
It was obvious to us they weren't. I mean, that was obvious to me from the day I walked in the door in 2013. And
so how does it now strike you that we learn that ASIO had at least some concerns about one of the accused shooters in 2019, and in 2025 he was able to get on a plane and go to the southern Philippines for a month before returning to Australia, before all of this happened?
I'm not surprised. I'm very disappointed. I'm very discouraged. But if things have not changed, which I don't believe they have dramatically, I'm not surprised. One of the things... I'm sorry.
You're not surprised, but what should have happened when he hopped on a plane and went to the southern Philippines?
Well, if
the system was working.
If the system may have been working, but not, much like the boys and girls in in Phoenix, the Phoenix is what should have happened, in my opinion, is that when those individuals got on that airplane, if the information had been shared that these were persons of interest, that when they went through border protection, something would have come up on the screen and said, hey, these folks are leaving the country. And when they left the country, that should have gone, let's say if ASIO was the originator, that they would have been informed. A desk officer would say, okay, these two individuals who were, and now they're in the Philippines.
The alarm should have gone off.
Oh,
John.
yeah, absolutely. That's what, the alarm should have gone off. And then why are they going to the Philippines? And, and then when they get in the Philippines, we've got relationships with the Philippines. They got to fill out those cards and stuff like that. Is that, then we can monitor what they're doing over there. And if they're that, maybe, at that point in time, we may have discovered that one of the alleged had 6 long-barreled weapons. I don't know. There's many things that I'm certain, as we do the post after the massacre at Bondi, we're going to learn a lot of things, just like we did with 911, which are going to be upsetting, and hopefully we'll be able to move forward from this. One of the things that I have, and sort of alluded to a bit earlier before, much like when we created the Office of Director of National Intelligence in the U.S., as we did here in Australia when we created the Office of National Intelligence, it's kind of a, it's not kind of, it is a organization of the willing. Is that if you're willing to coordinate, then it will happen. But if it's not in my interest, my best interest, if I don't have anything to gain from it, and the same thing happened in the United States, and in my opinion, the CIA was the worst of the whole mob. That's what upset Denny Blair when he was the Director of National Intelligence. But if you're not willing to coordinate, then it's not going to happen. And there was nothing that forced or mandated that the national intelligence community work together and share information.
So you get these separate fiefdoms
Oh, absolutely.
that don't talk to one another.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, geez, we could talk about this, Tim, for months, is that, if we want to, is that, you know, we really haven't empowered our Director General for National Intelligence. I mean, I think we've got, in regards, and he's about ready to leave the office, but for the first time that I can recollect, you know, we actually heard words come out of Andrew Scheer's mouth that were made public. I mean, he is a you know, mates of mine back in the United States, you know, they have the highest regard for Director General Scheer, as they did for Nick Warner. But he really has no authority to manage this. And as I said, in the United States, it took us a while in the U.S. to get there. And it wasn't until Jim Clapper, who wasn't that long ago, when we started to give, Mr. Clapper got budget authority. Now, if you want to get somebody's attention real quick, you give them budget authority.
So our Director General of National Intelligence is a toothless tiger, effectively?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, and I don't mean anything disparaging towards the man himself, but I think the Office of National Intelligence does not have the authorities to actually coordinate, make sure that collection management, make sure manning is equitable across the intelligence enterprise.
Shouldn't computer records these days, properly shared, make alarms on those two going to the Philippines a fairly simple matter?
It should, but if DFAT doesn't know what ASIO knows, they're not going to be able to, those alarms are not going to go off. If Home Affairs, where Border Protection is, doesn't know, those alarms aren't going to go off. And that's at the national level. You know, it is not going down to the New South Wales Police Department where these men lived, so that doesn't mean that we have to become a security state where we're watching every move of every citizen. But our citizens do expect our law enforcement and our national intelligence agencies to protect us from individuals that could be a threat.
So if you had carriage of Australia's intelligence services today, what's the first thing you'd do?
I'd give the Director of General National Intelligence budget authority over the intelligence community. And that doesn't mean he'd run their day-to-day operations. But what I would have him do was, when those budget submissions come in, what they want to do, they have to show what they're going to be working on. Say, for example, you know, the Geospatial Intelligence Organization, their budget's going to call for this, this, and this, say, for example. Well, there may be something that comes up, say, on the DIO budget that's very similar. Well, you don't want, we're a small country. You don't want duplication. You want redundancy, but you don't want duplication. And it may not be in the remit of the DIO to be doing that. So you can deconflict things from a budget perspective. And you can identify where your gaps are. But you also have to give the Director of National Intelligence a staff to do that. And we tried to do that on the cheap. We took the Office of National Assessments, which is one of the, I would rate it up there with any analytical organization out there. That and DIO. the Defense Intelligence Organization, are the two analytical bodies within the Australian intelligence community. Top notch, well known, and well regarded by the world for their analysis. But when we created the Office of National Intelligence here in Australia, we kind of dual purposed the Office of National Assessments.
We did it on the cheap.
We did, I think so. Again, my opinion is that we should have set up a different, complete staff around, like we did in the U.S., the Office of Director of National Intelligence, so that they would be separate. Because we had, when ONA, they, although they call them the Office of National Intelligence staff now, and they're kind of, I knew men and women that were over there were trying to do both jobs. They were trying to be really, really good analysts, but then they were trying to manage the community. And, you can't do that. In fact, in the United States, and I use the United States as an example, not to say they did it better, but as an example. Before the Director of National Intelligence was set up, the Director of CIA sort of had that role. He was called the Director of Central Intelligence. And he had a separate staff that wasn't part of CIA, where he was also the director, that was called the Community Management Staff. And they looked at the whole community, the budgets, the manning, the equipping, the acquisitions, all of that. And that's really, I think if we're going to empower our Office of the Director of National Intelligence, we should establish a community staff for him to run the community.
And does that become the focal point through which the information is properly shared throughout the intelligence community?
It should be, and I think, now, will it do it overnight? As I said, it didn't happen overnight in the U.S., but it'll help start breaking down some of those barriers. And that's, again, it cannot just be through the intelligence community at the federal level. We need to make sure that we're pushing that information down to the local police department, or the New South Wales, Melbourne, territorial and state police departments.
Seems to me you're of the view that when we get through the years of investigations that will now follow Bondi, we will learn that all of the information was there. It just wasn't all in the one place where it could be properly interpreted. Tell me, am I right or am I wrong?
I would say you're more right than you are wrong. I think there's probably a 90% probability you are spot on, that the indicators were there, that these two alleged, only one now because one of them is dead, these two alleged perpetrators, that the information was there, that someone would have said, aha, we need to go and have a talk with these folks.
If the information had been put together.
Yeah, I do. I think, and we won't know that. It's just speculation on my part, but I've been doing this a long time. I think the information will be there. And, it's just, it goes back to one of those things that, within, again, it goes back to some of I've always been sort of, if the Director General of National Intelligence is our senior intelligence person for coordinating the community, we don't hear a whole heck of a lot from him. We hear a lot from Director General Burgess, but that's one component of this whole big thing. I think there's 12 or 13 agencies that we call the National Intelligence Community here in Australia, or the Intelligence Community in Australia. It's the NIC in the US, I think it's the IC here. But we hear a lot from Director General Burgess, but why aren't we hearing from the Director General of National Intelligence more often? Because I said a couple of weeks ago, Andrew Scheer talked about his views for the first time that was open, not at a panel, closed panel, and everybody's like, but he's going out the door. It's just not, again, I could talk about this for a long time. It's the whole collection and requirements apparatus, because those gaps that we're trying to look at, those things have to be funded, and we need to, working with government, our Prime Minister and the government in power, and with the joint intelligence community that we have, parliamentary intelligence community, we have to identify how we're going to spend the resources that we have on filling those gaps, and that's future acquisitions. You know, is it going to be a satellite system? Is it going to be different type of radars and things like that?
Do we have to spend a lot more money on intelligence in Australia to do the job properly?
I don't know if we need to spend more money, because I don't know what the actual budget is. Much like in the U.S., it's probably hidden in other budgets. That's, you know, the U.S. intelligence community budget is part of the National Defense Authorization Act, so it's a big number in there, but you don't know exactly what it's being used for. I don't know if we need to spend more, but we probably need to spend more wisely. And I would be, again, I'd be fairly comfortable in saying there's probably a lot of duplication. As I said, redundancy is good, duplication is bad, and there's probably folks doubling down on the same things. And you know, one of the things that was a hallmark of the Australian intelligence analysts, whether they were at the Office of National Assessments or the Defense Intelligence Organization, is that the analysts here, they knew their business horizontally. And what I mean like that was they could tip and cue in their own heads where to look for things. They may not have been as in-depth analysts. Like you could pick out, you know, a thing on cybernetics, and you could probably find 25 different analysts in the United States could tell you everything about cybernetics, but they couldn't tell you what are the other factors that go into cybernetics, or how cybernetics impacts on cybersecurity, or on something like social psychology, which is or artificial intelligence. The analysts here in Australia, because we don't have as many, they're much broader. And that's what makes them so good, is that they can grasp onto something, and they'll know the left and the right limits, and they'll know how to percolate that. So I guess my thing is that if one of our savvy analysts had all the information, let's use the Bondi massacre as an example, I would be willing to bet he or she would have been able to come to a senior and say, this is what I know, this is how I know it, this is what I don't know, and this is where I'm looking, and this, boss, is who else needs to know what I know.
And police in New South Wales might have got a tip-off.
Absolutely, because that who else do you need to know is our police force and border protection and things like that.
To close, John, what strikes you about the debate or debates we're now having post-Bondi?
That's a very, without getting personal and emotional about it, that's, I guess, I've seen several news clips, I've seen several folks on the television that are now talking about who knew what when, which is exactly what we've been discussing.
Which is your business.
It's all about information sharing. You know, I think it would be interesting to go back, because I was in the embassy when the Lint shootings occurred, is that the U.S. Embassy brought together a team of FBI specialists that we brought in post to have sort of a panel that we ran for the Australians, invited them to it. We ran it, we brought them in, we had New South Wales Police Department there, we had local police department, we had AFP, we had ASIO, we had the special ops community from the ADF there, and it was shocking, particularly with the police forces, what they didn't know and what capabilities were available to them if they had only known what to ask for. And I would suspect that whoever has whatever Australian information is out there, and this was all, I can't go into like, because all Chatham House rules, it was all unclassified, but it was all Chatham House rules. It was really interesting from my perspective, and the FBI men and women that were running this panel that was for the Aussies to sort of do sort of a debrief for everybody about what capabilities truly were out there that could have assisted. I'm not saying that I don't want to indicate for any moment that anything that the New South Wales Police Department or anybody else did, anything would have turned out any differently. But it was just the information. It was quite obvious that the New South Wales Police Department didn't know some of the information was out there. The federal authorities didn't know some of the information and capabilities of the Australians. So it was one of those things where the right and the left hand didn't know what were going on, and that happens in combat. I mean, it's what we call the fog of war. However, the more that you do sharing, and the more that you rehearse together, and the more that you set up the pipeline so that things can be shared, the better off you're going to be in the long run. It's going to make us a safer country, and our citizens are going to feel safer.
So the Link Cafe became a case in point for this stovepiping of information.
I think it's a good illustration, and I guess when you go, whatever commission happens, it would be, I'm not going to be there, but I would think that would be a start point. What were the lessons learned from the Link Cafe? Look at them and see if any of them are repeated here, and if they are, then shame on us as both an information, as a government, as an intelligence organization, whatever the case may be.
You shouldn't have to learn from your mistakes twice.
Well, exactly, because it's obvious if you had these lessons learned and you said you were going to implement these things and they weren't implemented, it wasn't a lesson learned. It was a lesson forgotten. And as a result of that, we have the massacre that we had. Now that massacre may have happened even if it was a perfect information environment. We don't know, but I'm certain we would have had the ability to at least anticipate what might happen a little better. Because one of the things, and I've even heard some folks out there called this an intelligence failure. I'm not a believer in intelligence failures. What I believe in are it's intelligence informs decision makers. That's what intelligence does. Decision makers make decisions, whether it's the prime minister or a minister, a director general, an admiral or a general. They make decisions based on the information that they're given. And if they are only going to get a silo of information, they're not going to be able to make good decisions. And it's the responsibility of all to be able to contribute to that. And what really frosts me, having been in this business a while, is when decision makers try to justify bad decisions by shaping the intelligence or saying the intelligence wasn't there, which I think is a bunch of malarkey. Decision makers make decisions. And as bad as intelligence sharing is, bad decisions usually have deadly results.
Jhon Powers, we very much appreciate your expertise. Thank you for speaking with The Issue.
Thanks, Tim. Always a pleasure.